My parents handed everything to my brother because he'd build a real family. But they still expected me to pay every bill until mom texted about the overdue electric and I finally let their favorite son handle it. Instead, my name's Caleb. I'm 32, and for most of my life I've played the role of the responsible one. You know the type, the kid who never got into trouble, who always stayed quiet during arguments, who picked up after others without being asked, the one who didn't need much. And that's exactly how my parents liked it. They never said it out loud, but it became pretty obvious by the time I hit my 20s. My job wasn't to be cared for. It was to take care of everyone else, especially my younger brother, Darren. Darren is 29 now, and growing up, he was everything I wasn't. Loud, reckless, charming in that way that made adults laugh off bad behavior like it was a phase. He scraped by in school, partied through college, and somehow always landed on his feet. Meanwhile, I worked part-time while studying engineering, skipped vacations to save money, and helped with house repairs so mom and dad wouldn't have to call someone. I thought I was earning their respect, maybe even their pride. But what I really was, I've come to realize, was convenient. The first sign that things weren't as equal as I thought came just after college. Darren had dropped out of a business program for the second time and was working some temp job at a warehouse. I had just landed my first full-time engineering position and was over the moon about it. I remember coming home that weekend with a bottle of champagne and my first paycheck stub thinking maybe, just maybe. This time, Dad would say he was proud of me. He barely looked up from the TV. Mom gave me a quick hug, then asked if I could cover Darren's car insurance that month because he was in between jobs again. I did it. Of course I did, because that's what I'd always done. Fast forward a few years and I bought a modest townhouse an hour outside the city. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Meanwhile, Darren was still living at home, cycling through jobs and girlfriends, none of which ever lasted more than a few months. I'd started setting boundaries, saying no when they asked for help with his credit card debt, or when Mom hinted that I should invite him to live with me just until he gets on his feet. That's when things started to turn. They didn't argue with me directly. No yelling or guilt trips, just silence. Cold, heavy silence. Calls went unanswered. Texts were suddenly seen but not replied to. I'd visit for the holidays and feel like a guest in my own family. And Darren, he soaked it up. He'd make jokes about how I was the corporate robot while he was the free spirit chasing dreams, and my parents would laugh along like he was some misunderstood genius. I kept my distance, built my own life until last year when my grandfather passed away. He was the only one in the family who ever really saw me. He was a quiet man, but he always asked about my projects, sent me books about leadership and innovation, and told me to aim higher. I spent more time with him than anyone else in the family. We bonded over chess, classic sci-fi, and our shared love for restoring old watches. So when I got the call from the family lawyer, I assumed naively that I'd at least be part of the conversation about his estate. I wasn't. Turns out Grandpa had passed everything: his house, his antique collection, even his car, to my parents, trusting them to distribute it fairly, and they had decided to give it all to Darren. Their reason: he'll have a family someday. He'll need the stability. I sat there in stunned silence as they told me this, like it was the most logical thing in the world. Like it made perfect sense that I, the one who had been there for Grandpa, who had helped him when his health was declining, who had driven him to his checkups, got nothing. Not even the chess set we used to play on every Sunday. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just nodded, said, "Thanks for letting me know," and left. That was the moment I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not yet just clarity, like someone had wiped fog off a mirror and shown me what had been staring me in the face for years. But it didn't stop there. About 6 months later, I started getting texts from Mom. First, it was small stuff, asking if I could help out with their internet bill because Dad was between contracts. Then it was the electric bill. Then the property taxes on Grandpa's house, the same house they'd gifted to Darren, who had moved in with his new girlfriend and was already planning to remodel the garage into a recording studio. "You know how hard it is right now." Mom wrote, "You're doing so well. You should help." At first, I ignored the messages. Then I responded with polite no's. Then I stopped responding altogether. That's when the guilt trips began. My aunt called me one night to ask why I was punishing my parents. Darren left me a voicemail saying I'd changed and that success had made me arrogant. And then just last week I got the text, the one that made me sit down, reread it 3 times, and take a very long, very deep breath. It was from Mom. Simple, cold, no greeting. "Electric's past due. You better handle it." That was it. No please. No can you. Just an expectation like paying their bills was a job I'd forgotten to clock in for. I stared at that message for a long time. The anger didn't come immediately. It was a slow burn, a low simmer in my gut that had been building for years, finally bubbling to the surface. I didn't respond right away. I didn't want to be impulsive. I wanted to be clear. For the first time in my life, I wanted them to understand exactly who I was and who I wasn't anymore. And so I started writing a reply not just to the text, but to everything. The years of being the fallback, the expectation that I would give without question while Darren was given without earning a thing. I thought about what I'd say, how I'd say it, and how this time I wasn't going to walk away quietly. I haven't sent the message yet, but I will soon. The morning after that text, I sat at my kitchen table, still staring at it like it might disappear if I looked hard enough. Electric's past due. You better handle it. I read it over and over. Not even a question, not even a can you please, just a command like I was an employee whose paycheck they'd forgotten to sign for the past 3 decades. I didn't reply. Instead, I started thinking back through all the quiet little moments that had led here. How I'd been groomed to accept this treatment without protest. How every time I tried to draw a boundary, I was met with subtle punishment, withdrawn affection, sudden silence, backhanded comments from relatives that I think I'm too good now. I convinced myself for years that keeping the peace was noble, that maybe if I just gave a little more, tried a little harder, they'd treat me like a son and not a utility. But now, I was done pretending. And the next few weeks only confirmed that I was making the right call. It started with a Facebook post. Darren had tagged our parents in a photo outside Grandpa's old house. The caption, "New beginnings, turning this place into the dream home for me and my future fam. Thanks Mom and Dad for believing in me." The comments were filled with congratulations, heart emojis, and people praising my parents for being so generous and supportive. Not one mention of the fact that I, their other son, had poured hundreds of hours into that house before Grandpa passed, that I'd fixed the leaky roof, retiled the bathroom, and repainted the entire downstairs after he fell and couldn't do it himself. I didn't comment. I didn't like it. I just stared at the screen for a while, feeling something twist in my chest like I was watching someone else live the life I'd worked for. A life handed to him wrapped in ribbon while I was being sent invoices for the lights in a house I hadn't stepped foot in since the funeral. Then came the phone call. I hadn't spoken to Dad in months, but one night he called out of the blue. No small talk. No, "How have you been?" Just a deep sigh. And then, "You know your mother's not doing well with all this stress, Caleb." I waited for him to continue confused. All what stress? He scoffed like I was being difficult on purpose. The bills, the house upkeep. And now Darren's talking about starting a family soon. "We thought you'd be more involved." I nearly dropped the phone. "Involved? I'm not even invited, Dad." There was a long silence. Then he said something that snapped something in me cleaning too. "We didn't think you'd mind, Caleb. You don't need what Darren needs. He's going to have kids, a wife. You're, independent." That word, independent. It used to feel like a compliment. Now it felt like a polite way of calling me disposable. I didn't yell, I didn't argue. I just said, "I've got to go," and hung up. The next week, I got a letter in the mail. At first, I thought it was junk. No return address, just my name printed in bold letters. But inside was a neatly folded list of expenses handwritten in my mother's familiar cursive. Internet, gas, electric, property tax at the bottom. Your share, $740. Please send before the 15th. No note, no explanation, just a bill. My hands trembled as I folded the paper back up. I could feel the old instinct kicking in. The voice in my head that told me to keep the peace, just pay it. Don't make things harder. But another voice had started speaking too. One that asked, "Why are you financing their favoritism?" And that voice was getting louder. I didn't pay the bill. Instead, I called my friend Jordan, an old college buddy who'd gone into estate law, and asked a question I'd never thought I'd say out loud. "If someone gives away inheritance before probate and there's no written will, is there anything that can be done?" He paused. "You're talking about your grandfather?" I nodded even though he couldn't see me. "Well," he said slowly, "if it was verbal and there's no paper trail, it's hard to dispute. But if they misrepresented the inheritance or used coercion, or if there's proof your grandfather's wishes were ignored, you might have a case." Why I didn't answer. I just thanked him and hung up. The next family event I got invited to was Darren's engagement party. I hadn't seen him or my parents since that phone call, and I was shocked they even bothered to include me. The invite came in the mail. Gold foil lettering, and a picture of Darren and his fiancée posing on the porch of Grandpa's house. The same porch I'd painted the summer after college while Darren was off on a last-minute cruise paid for by Mom's emergency savings. I wasn't planning to go, but then I thought about that chess set, the one Grandpa had promised me when I was 16 after I finally beat him in a full match. "You've earned it," he said, smiling. "Someday this will be yours." I never saw it again after he died. I checked the invitation one more time. No personal note, no message from Darren. Just a printed line that said, "Let's celebrate love and family." Family right. I marked the date on my calendar. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but something had shifted. I was no longer trying to be included. I was planning my exit, and I wanted them to remember it. The day of Darren's engagement party arrived with the kind of heaviness that settles in your bones before you even get out of bed. I hadn't RSVP'd, hadn't called, hadn't given them any reason to expect me. But I went anyway, not to celebrate, not to make peace, but because I needed to see with my own eyes just how far gone this family really was. The house looked almost unrecognizable. Grandpa's clean, weather-worn white siding was now some trendy charcoal gray. The old rose bushes were ripped out, replaced with a soulless rock garden. The porch, the one where we used to sit in silence, watching the sun dip behind the hills, had been extended into a wide, wraparound deck with twinkle lights and overpriced patio furniture. And right there on a custom wooden sign hanging beside the door, the future home of the Bell family. Darren's last name, not ours. I stepped through the door and was hit with a wave of laughter, chatter, and the clinking of glasses. The air smelled of catered appetizers and designer candles. No trace of the old home that once held quiet afternoons and creaky floorboards. I wasn't greeted. No one even noticed I'd arrived at first. I stood by the door for a full minute before my aunt finally spotted me and came over with a forced smile. "Caleb, so glad you made it," I nodded, trying to keep my face neutral. Mom was near the fireplace chatting with some women I didn't recognize. She turned just enough to make eye contact with me and then looked away just like that, as if I were someone's awkward coworker who had shown up by accident. Dad eventually walked over and gave me a firm handshake like we were business associates. "You're looking well," he said. "Yeah," I replied. He gave a curt nod and then excused himself to check on the food. I watched as Darren made his grand entrance from upstairs with his fiancée, Tessa, I think her name was, laughing at something he'd whispered in her ear. The room practically erupted in applause. He soaked it up like a politician at a campaign rally, waving giving finger guns, even winking at a few of the guests. When he finally saw me, his smile faltered just slightly. Then he walked over with that casual swagger I'd known since childhood. "Caleb, wow, wasn't sure you'd show up. Got the invite." I said, "Yeah, well, no hard feelings about the house, right? I mean, Mom and Dad did what they thought was fair." I tried to tell them to include you more, but he trailed off with a shrug like it was out of his hands. Like I should be thanking him for even mentioning me at all. Then he chuckled. "Hey, at least you don't have to worry about renovations, right? You're the free agent. No strings." I didn't respond. I just looked past him toward the display table near the kitchen. There, under a glass case, was something that stopped me cold. Grandpa's chess set polished on display, labeled like a museum piece. A tiny engraved plaque read from our family's legacy, now part of our new beginning. I felt something inside me crack. That set wasn't just sentimental. It was symbolic. It was mine. Not legally, maybe, but spiritually. Grandpa had promised it to me. I remembered every piece, every smooth wooden bishop, the worn edges of the pawns. That set had seen me through adolescence. It had sat between us through conversations about life, ambition, self-worth. I'd never asked for anything else from Grandpa because I believed that set was enough, that it meant something. And now it was just a prop in Darren's showroom of success. I turned away before anyone could see the heat rising behind my eyes. I went out to the backyard to clear my head, but that was a mistake too. The backyard had been transformed into a full event space. White tents, fairy lights, a bar, even a hired photographer. And that's when I heard it. "We're thinking of asking Caleb to co-sign the mortgage." Tessa was saying, her voice soft, but not soft enough. "Just until the new loan clears. Darren said he's good for it, but the bank wants more income on the application." I froze behind a pillar listening. "Your mom said he'll do it," she added. "She said he always helps when she asks." My breath caught. They weren't just assuming I'd pay the bills. They were making plans to tie me financially to a house I didn't own, didn't live in, wasn't even welcome in. I stood there in stunned silence, my mind racing. A co-signed mortgage? That wasn't help. That was a shackle. Then I heard Darren's voice from the other side of the tent. "Caleb won't say no. He never does. He acts all cold sometimes, but deep down he still wants their approval. He'll cave." They all laughed. That was it. The moment the betrayal wasn't just that they'd taken the inheritance. It wasn't even the lies or the erasure of everything I'd done for the family. It was this plan to chain me again to their convenience. This belief that I was so desperate for crumbs of affection that I'd sabotage my own future just to stay in their orbit. I walked back inside and headed straight for the display case. I stared at the chest set one more time. The queen was in the wrong spot. They didn't even know how to set it up properly. I looked around at the house, at the people laughing, drinking, congratulating each other for building a future with my legacy, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power, not anger, not bitterness, just quiet, resolute clarity. This wasn't my family anymore, and I wasn't their safety net, not anymore. And what I did next made sure they would never forget that I left the party without saying goodbye. I didn't make a scene, didn't throw accusations, didn't scream or cry or flip a table like I used to fantasize about when I was younger and angrier. I just slipped out the side door and walked down the street until I reached my car. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet that made you hear your own breath too loudly. I sat behind the wheel for a long time, staring at the dashboard, hands motionless on my thighs. The street lamps made long shadows across the windshield. Everything looked unreal, like I was watching my own life from outside my body. That chess set, that conversation about the mortgage, that look on Mom's face when she saw me and just turned away. I'd never felt more disposable, like I was a credit line with a pulse, like my value was in what I could do, not who I was. That kind of realization doesn't come like a lightning strike. It's slower, a dull ache that builds over years until one day you just can't carry it anymore. That night I didn't go home. I drove nowhere in particular. Just kept the engine running and let the road carry me through the city past late-night gas stations and empty parking lots and convenience stores still lit by flickering neon. My mind was spinning, not with rage but with questions. How did I let it get this far? How did I become the one who was left out of my own family's future? How did I become the one no one fought for? I ended up at a late-night diner on the edge of town, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and the smell of burnt coffee soaked into the walls. I sat at the counter and ordered pancakes I wasn't hungry for. The waitress didn't ask questions. She just kept refilling my cup like she knew I needed time. That's where the breakdown happened. Not a loud one. No sobbing or shouting, just me hunched over a plate of syrup-soaked pancakes, quietly letting tears fall into my coffee as the jukebox played some forgotten 80s ballad. It was grief. Grief for the family I thought I had. For the version of myself I'd killed off piece by piece to stay in their good graces. For the time I'd never get back. I didn't go into work the next day. I told my boss I wasn't feeling well, which wasn't a lie. I didn't shower, didn't shave, just sat in my living room staring at old photo albums I dug out of the closet. Pictures of me and Darren as kids, birthday parties, camping trips. The look on my face back then, so hopeful, so eager to please. I wanted to reach through the page and tell that kid, they don't love you the way you deserve to be loved. Stop trying so hard. That week, the text started again. Mom, can you call the bank? The water bill bounced, then we're adding Darren's name to Grandpa's property officially. Just a formality. We'll need your signature. Then finally, you're being cruel, Caleb. We're family. Stop punishing us because life gave Darren different needs. Different needs. I couldn't even bring myself to reply. Instead, I deleted the thread, blocked her number, then blocked Dad's, then Darren's. I even blocked my aunt, who'd always taken their side in group chats, sending passive-aggressive Bible quotes and guilt-ridden messages about honoring your parents. I spent the next few days in silence. No calls, no texts, no demands. It was like walking through a post-storm forest, broken trees everywhere, debris underfoot, but strangely peaceful. Still, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. Cutting them off even temporarily was like pulling out a deeply embedded thorn. It hurt going in. It hurt more coming out. But I knew I had to do it if I ever wanted to walk without limping. I started writing in a journal again, something I hadn't done since college. Just page after page of unfiltered thoughts. Every memory, every moment that now made sense in hindsight. The times I fixed the fence while Darren played video games. The time I loaned Dad $2,000 to help with the house, only to find out it paid for Darren's motorcycle. The Thanksgiving when I brought a girlfriend and no one even remembered her name by dessert. I poured it all out. And in the quiet that followed, something new crept in. Resolve, not vengeance. Not yet, but clarity. Direction. I wasn't just cutting ties, I was rebuilding my foundation. I called my accountant, asked him to run a full audit on anything my name was attached to. Family property, joint accounts, cosign loans from years ago. I wanted everything documented. Then I made an appointment with a financial advisor to explore options for moving assets, restructuring savings, and protecting my credit. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a big, satisfying showdown. It was small, quiet steps. I started going for early morning walks again, something I used to love before life got too busy. I cleared out old clothes, rearranged my living room, threw away things that no longer sparked anything in me. It felt symbolic, even if it was small. I was creating space for peace, for breath, for the person I might have been if I hadn't spent decades playing someone else's supporting role. Then one morning, I checked my email and saw it. A message from a law firm. Subject: retransfer of property and financial responsibility. I opened it, heart pounding. Inside was a PDF, a document that listed my name as a co-owner of Grandpa's house. Not legal owner, but financially responsible party. It had been filed 3 months ago. No one had told me, no one had asked. And now the bank considered me equally liable for any debts attached to the house repairs property tax, mortgage refinance fees. They had signed me into their future without permission, without warning. I stared at the document for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and called someone I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. Grandpa's old lawyer. I still had his business card. I kept it in a drawer tucked inside a watch Grandpa had given me for my college graduation. A watch Darren once joked looked cheap. The lawyer answered after the second ring. "Mr. Langley," I said. "This is Caleb." "Caleb Warren." I was Lewis Warren's grandson. There was a pause. Then a warm, familiar voice replied, "I remember you, son. Your grandfather was proud of you. How can I help?" I took a breath and I told him everything. Mr. Langley didn't interrupt, not once. I told him about the house, the inheritance, the mounting bills, and the way my parents and Darren had signed my name onto financial documents without my knowledge or consent. I even told him about the chess set, though I tried to pretend like that wasn't the part that still kept me up at night. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Caleb, I don't usually speak ill of clients, but your grandfather would be ashamed of how they've treated you. He trusted them to handle things honorably, but if they forged your signature or misrepresented your financial obligations, you may have more leverage than you think." That was the first moment in weeks, maybe months, where I felt the tide begin to turn. He offered to meet in person and go over everything I had. Bank statements, texts, emails, that PDF from the lawyer. I dug through years of digital dust, pulling out every receipt, every Venmo transfer for Darren's debts. Every old message where my mom thanked me for covering bills I now realized were part of a larger pattern. It was like assembling a puzzle I never knew I'd been building. Mr. Langley got to work immediately. He helped me draft a legal notice requesting removal of my name from the property's financial obligations, citing lack of consent and misrepresentation. He also flagged the mortgage application that Tessa had mentioned at the engagement party and confirmed they had tried to add me as a co-signer, but it had been declined because they lacked a signed document from me. I wasn't just cutting them off anymore, I was protecting myself. Meanwhile, something else started happening. With all the energy I used to pour into my family's drama, I suddenly had time space to focus on things that actually mattered. I started showing up to work sharper, more alert. My manager noticed. I was offered a project lead position for a high-profile infrastructure redesign in the city, something I would have never taken on if I were still playing damage control back home. I accepted. Then I did something I'd never done before. I booked a vacation, a real one. 2 weeks in Lisbon alone. It wasn't just to get away. It was a declaration that my time, my peace, my life was mine again. On that trip, something shifted in me. I journaled daily, walked the hills with no schedule, sat at cafes without checking my phone. There were no emergencies to fix, no family drama pulling me back in, just me, a city I didn't know, and the sound of my own voice finally getting a chance to speak uninterrupted. And I started to hear it clearly. I wasn't broken, I wasn't cold, I wasn't the selfish one. I was free. When I came back, I found a letter waiting at my door, certified from my parents' lawyer. They were surprised by the legal notice. They felt betrayed, claimed they had only ever tried to give Darren a chance at a real life that they assumed I would understand given how well I was doing. But the final paragraph was the kicker. They asked me to reconsider, to undo the paperwork, to not make this public. The implication was clear. They were scared that I might tell people what they'd done, that the mask they wore in public, that of a generous, close-knit traditional family, might finally crack. That's when I knew I had the upper hand, because for the first time they needed me, and I didn't need them at all. I wrote back a single sentence. All further communication can go through my attorney. A week later, Mr. Langley called with news. My name had been formally removed from all legal responsibility regarding the property. They'd backed off quietly, begrudgingly, but completely. It felt like a final key turning in a lock I hadn't realized I'd been trapped behind. Then 2 months after that, I got an invitation in the mail. Not from my family, from a local nonprofit one I'd once donated to on a whim years ago. They were asking me to be a guest speaker on a panel about financial independence, setting boundaries and recovering from toxic family dynamics. Apparently, I'd shared a personal note with them back then in a donation message, and someone had kept it. They wanted me to tell my story. I almost declined, but something told me to go. Standing on that stage, I told a room full of strangers about a chess set, a forged document, and the long, painful road of learning to stop begging people to treat me with dignity. I watched faces nod, eyes widen, and shoulders ease as they saw parts of themselves in my story. Afterward, someone came up to me, a woman in her 40s, teary-eyed, and whispered, "Thank you." I thought I was the only one. I wasn't just healing anymore, I was helping. And as I walked home that night under a sky free of clouds or expectations, I realized something important. I hadn't lost a family. I had outgrown one. And the best part, I was just getting started. About a month after the nonprofit event, I got an email from someone unexpected. It was from an old friend of my grandfather's, Mr. Reinhardt, a historian and antiques appraiser, who used to come over sometimes when I was a kid. He'd sit with Grandpa in the sunroom sipping coffee and talking about the provenance of old warm metals, vintage clocks, and obscure board games. I hadn't seen him since I was a teenager, but the email was warm, direct, and surprising. He wrote, "Caleb, I happened to see you speak at the panel a few weeks back. You've grown into a man your grandfather would have been immensely proud of. I wanted to reach out because something's come to my attention that you may not be aware of. Something concerning your grandfather's belongings. Would you be willing to meet?" That last sentence lit a spark in me. We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe downtown, the kind where you can still hear the clink of ceramic mugs and the soft hum of conversation. Mr. Reinhardt was older now, slower with deeper lines etched into his face, but his eyes were sharp and his memory sharper. We sat down and he wasted no time. "Your grandfather had a will," he said. I froze. I thought he left everything to my parents. He shook his head. "He had a will, one he wrote himself about 8 months before he passed. I helped him draft it. In fact, he wanted everything to be clear. Most of his personal belongings were to go to you, including that chess set." My stomach dropped, but the will was never filed. "Your parents insisted there wasn't one." He nodded gravely. I was surprised when I heard they claimed there was no documentation. I assumed they had changed plans, or perhaps your grandfather never finalized it. But then I found this. He pulled a slim envelope from his coat pocket, worn but sealed with wax. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. "Grandpa's to be opened by Caleb Warren upon my death." I took the envelope with trembling fingers, barely able to breathe. Inside was a single page. "Caleb, if you're reading this, then something has gone wrong, and this letter never made it to you the way I intended. I want you to know something, son. You were always the one I believed in, the one who showed up, the one who earned every ounce of my respect. I asked your parents to distribute things fairly, thinking they'd honor my wishes. But just in case they didn't, I wanted to put this in writing. The chess set is yours. So are my watch collection, my military memorabilia, and the safety deposit box at Hanover Bank. Box 442. Everything in that box is yours by right, not charity. I hope you never have to use this as proof, but if you do, don't be afraid to fight for what's already yours." Grandpa? I read the letter 3 times before I looked up. "Do you know what's in the box?" I asked. Mr. Reinhardt smiled faintly. "Only your grandfather knew for sure, but I can tell you this. He once told me that legacy isn't just about money or things. It's about making sure the right people carry the torch." That same afternoon, I went to Hanover Bank. It took some verification and a couple of hours, but eventually a bank manager led me into a quiet back room with a vault door. I signed a release, showed my ID, and was handed a small iron key. Box 442 was heavy. Inside, I found a certified copy of the original will, signed and dated, an insurance appraisal for the chess set, and several antique watches totaling over $80,000. A handwritten inventory of Grandpa's military medals and antique tools, each with a note about its history, and tucked beneath it all, a flash drive. I took it home and plugged it into my laptop. The drive contained several document scans of receipts, letters, property transfers, and one folder labeled Darren. Inside were screenshots and PDFs, texts from my mother discussing keeping Caleb in the dark, a copy of a forged signature on a property reassignment form, and even a voice memo recorded by Grandpa himself, where he said clearly and calmly, "If this message is heard by anyone but Caleb, then you've taken what was never yours. And I hope he finds this before the damage is irreversible." I sat there in stunned silence. Everything I'd suspected was true. But this wasn't just proof. This was power. The kind of power that could flip the entire narrative legally, ethically, socially. I could expose them not just to our family and neighbors, but in court if I wanted to. I had the original will, the voice recordings, the financial appraisals, even hard evidence of forgery. I made copies, saved everything to an encrypted cloud drive, forwarded key files to Mr. Langley, who nearly dropped the phone when I told him this. He said changes everything. But I wasn't in a rush because now for the first time I was playing chess with a full board in front of me. They thought I was out of moves, but I still had my queen, and the moment to strike was coming soon. I just had to decide how public I wanted the fall to be. I waited exactly 11 days. Not because I was unsure, not because I had doubts. I waited because timing, like in chess, is everything. And if my family had taught me anything, it's that people who rely on your silence get nervous when it stretches just long enough. They start wondering if you're building something. And I was. The morning of the 12th day, I called Mr. Langley. I'm ready. I said he didn't ask what I meant. He already knew. We'd spent the last week carefully preparing every legal thread we'd need. The original will had been submitted to the probate court as a previously undisclosed document. Langley filed a petition for formal probate backed by the will, the notarized letter Grandpa left, and the voice recording. That alone would have been enough to shake the ground beneath them. But that wasn't the move. That was just the setup. The real move, the check, was what I sent to the rest of the family a day later. An envelope neatly addressed, certified, one copy to my parents, one to Darren, and a digital version to my aunt just in case. Inside was a letter, polite, firm, written like someone who wasn't asking, but informing to whom it may concern. As you are likely now aware, a certified and signed copy of Lewis Warren's original will has been located and filed with the probate court. In accordance with his final wishes, several personal assets currently in your possession, including but not limited to the vintage chess set, antique watches, and military memorabilia, have been rightfully and legally designated to me. Furthermore, due to your unauthorized attempt to assign financial responsibility to me without my consent, as well as the documented evidence of forged signatures and misrepresentation of estate-related matters, I have initiated a formal claim of fraud currently under review by the appropriate parties. At this time, I am offering a resolution. Return all assets named in the original will. Cease any further financial contact with me and acknowledge the updated probate documentation in writing within 7 business days. If these conditions are met, I will refrain from pursuing charges of forgery and public disclosure of the events leading up to this filing. Failure to comply will result in immediate legal escalation and the public release of the recorded materials in my possession. Sincerely, Caleb Warren. I didn't include threats. I didn't need to. The implication was enough. The following days were quiet, too quiet. Then on day 6, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a delivery man standing beside a wheeled dolly with 2 wooden crates and a smaller velvet line case. No note, just a signature form and a label. Returned to rightful owner. Inside was everything. The chess set untouched, still in its display box. The watches cleaned, polished, arranged in the same order Grandpa always kept them. And the medals, each pinned to a velvet board with a copy of Grandpa's old handwritten notes tucked behind them. I stared at them for a long time. Not out of joy, not out of triumph, but because I realized this was the first time in years I had something from my family that wasn't laced with a demand. The next morning, Mr. Langley called. They complied, he said. The court has acknowledged the will and your claim has been upheld. You're now the legal executive of your grandfather's estate. Executive, I asked. He chuckled. You're in charge, Caleb, of everything that's left. And that's when I made the final move. I went back to Grandpa's house not alone. I brought a real estate agent, an appraiser, and a photographer. The house wasn't just part of Darren's future anymore. It was part of my past. A past I was finally ready to let go of. The moment the documents cleared, I listed it for sale. Full public listing, photos, history, even an open house. Within 3 weeks, it sold above asking price. Darren found out from the sign out front. Apparently, my parents had quietly transferred the title to him months ago, but it wasn't legal. Not anymore. Grandpa's will overrode everything. They'd given him a house they had no right to, and now it was gone. I didn't take the money and splurge. I used it to start something my grandfather would have been proud of, a foundation in his name, a quiet scholarship fund for students in engineering and history, with a focus on those from neglected backgrounds. People like me who'd spent their lives giving more than they received. Word got around. People started whispering at church, at family functions, even online. Neighbors noticed the for sale sign vanish and a scholarship pop up in the local news the next month. And though I never named names, the paper trail was clean enough for anyone curious to find out what had really happened. My aunt reached out once, a short email. I don't know what's gotten into you. You used to be so kind. I didn't reply because kindness doesn't mean compliance. And forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. They wanted to write me out of my own story. But now I held the pen and they would never hold it again. The fallout didn't come all at once. It was slow, like frost creeping across a window, quiet, inevitable, and deeply revealing. The first to react was Darren. He showed up at my office, not my home. He knew better than that, but my workplace. Security called up confused, saying a man claiming to be my brother was demanding to speak with me. I stepped into the lobby just to look him in the eye. He hadn't dressed for a confrontation. He looked tired, unshaven, a shadow of the man who once posed on Grandpa's porch like he'd conquered something. "You sold my house," he hissed the moment he saw me. "Grandpa's house," I corrected calm. He laughed bitterly. "You think you're some kind of hero now? What, because you made a scholarship and sent back the bills?" I tilted my head slightly. "I never sent anything back. I just stopped playing your game. You ruined everything," he snapped. Tessa left. "She didn't want to raise a kid with me on borrowed land. You took everything over what a chess set. I didn't rise to it. You didn't lose a house, Darren. You lost access, and that's all you ever really cared about." His face twisted like he wanted to say something more, but I didn't give him the chance. I nodded to security. "We're done here." They escorted him out. That was the last time I saw him. Word of the will. And what it revealed spread quietly but thoroughly. My parents tried to spin it, of course. Claimed I'd misunderstood things, that Grandpa hadn't been in his right mind when he wrote that letter. But once the forgery came up in court records, people began stepping back. Neighbors who once praised their family values stopped waving. Church members asked quiet questions they couldn't answer. Even my aunt, ever the voice of guilt, disappeared from my inbox. No more Bible verses. No more digs about honoring thy father and mother, because you can't shame someone who no longer needs your approval. Financially, they took a hit. The mortgage Darren had hoped to refinance fell back onto their shoulders. With Darren out of the picture and no more bailout money from me, they began slipping. Late payments, calls from creditors, whispers of a downsized car and a frozen credit card. I didn't cheer for their downfall, but I didn't save them either. Because the truth is, they'd never fallen from grace. They'd just run out of ways to hide what was always underneath. I kept building. The foundation grew. We funded our first 3 scholarships within the year. I started mentoring a student named Elijah. Quiet, focused, the kind of kid who reminded me a little too much of myself at 17. We met twice a month, mostly to talk about goals and balance. But one day he asked me something that caught me off guard. "How do you stay so calm when people try to walk all over you?" I smiled at that, because for years I didn't. I was just quiet, and silence isn't the same as peace. So I told him the truth. "You stay calm," I said, "when you know how the game ends." He didn't get it right away. He would someday. Weeks later, I unpacked the chess set for the first time since getting it back. I laid out the pieces slowly, one by one, felt the weight of the king in my palm, the groove where Grandpa's thumb used to rest, and then without realizing, I whispered something aloud to the empty room. "Checkmate." And I finally felt it that I'd